Look down at the ground beneath your feet. It is just dirt, stone, perhaps poured concrete or engineered wood. It has no inherent pulse, no ambition, no consciousness. Yet a mathematical abstraction layered over this physical space dictates who holds power, who builds generational dynasties, and who fights for survival in the margins. We are looking at an asset class so staggeringly massive that its total estimated value exceeds $320 trillion. That is more than all the globally traded equities, all the sovereign debt, and all the mined gold on the planet combined, multiplied several times over. It is the apex predator of wealth generation. Let's step into the shadows of the greatest, most normalized monopoly in human history, an invisible architecture of control known simply as real estate. We are not just talking about the four walls where you sleep or the roof over your head. We are talking about the commodification of the earth itself, a system where geography is sliced, diced, leveraged, and traded by forces operating far above our heads. To understand how we arrived at a reality where an empty glass box in the sky is worth more than the lifetime labor of 1,000 people, we have to tear down the blueprint of civilization and look at the raw, brutal foundation. For the vast majority of human existence, the idea of owning a piece of the planet was completely alien. Nomadic tribes moved with the seasons, following herds and weather patterns, treating the land as a temporary host rather than a permanent possession. But then came the agricultural revolution. Seeds were planted in the fertile valleys. Irrigation trenches were dug into the soil. For the first time, human survival required staying in one place, protecting a specific patch of dirt from raiders and wildlife. Lines were drawn in the mud. Fences went up. This was the moment the earth transitioned from a habitat into property. Fast forward to the feudal eras, and this concept mutated into an absolute weapon of mass subjugation. Kings and warlords did not just claim the land, they claimed everything that grew on it, including the people who worked the fields. The legal frameworks of property rights began to formalize, relying on heavily guarded scrolls and wax seals to prove who had the divine right to extract wealth from the soil. Let's examine the very word /mortgage/ and its chilling etymology. It originates from Old French, /mort/ meaning dead and /gage/ meaning pledge, a death pledge. It was a contract that died either when the debt was finally paid or when the borrower failed to pay and the land was violently seized. This was not a system designed for the common person to build wealth. It was a mechanism for the elite to lock up the finite resource of physical space and ensure the working class remained eternally indebted. But as populations exploded and the Industrial Revolution dragged millions from the agrarian countryside into choking, soot-filled urban centers, the rules of the game had to evolve. The ground level was suddenly completely occupied. There was no more dirt to claim in the city centers, so they looked up. The invention of the safety elevator and the mass production of structural steel changed the geometry of wealth forever. Suddenly, a tiny footprint of land could be multiplied vertically into the sky, creating hundreds of artificial plots of property stacked on top of one another. The skyscraper was not just a marvel of engineering, it was the ultimate financial hack. But building these colossal monuments required a level of capital that even the wealthiest industrialists could not produce alone. This birthed the modern era of commercial real estate finance, a labyrinthine system of syndicated loans, mezzanine debt, and securitization. Real estate ceased to be just a physical location and transformed into a highly liquid, hyper-abstracted financial derivative. Let's look closely at the mechanics of this transformation. A massive residential complex is built, but the developer does not hold it. They sell the cash flow, the monthly rent checks of 1,000 families, to a colossal global asset manager. This asset manager then chops up that income stream into thousands of tiny digital fractions, bundles them with other properties, and sells them as bonds to pension funds in foreign countries. The teacher in a rural town is unwittingly relying on the rent hikes of a struggling family 1,000 miles away to fund their retirement. It is a brilliant, terrifying closed-loop system of perpetual extraction. If decoding the hidden systems that govern our wealth, our cities, and our very survival fascinates you, hit that subscribe button. We unearth these financial and historical blueprints every single week. Now, returning to the concrete jungle, we have to examine the psychological manipulation baked into modern housing. We are sold the dream of homeownership as the ultimate marker of freedom. You sign a 30-year contract, promising a massive portion of your future labor to a centralized bank in exchange for a deed. For decades, this system actually functioned as a ladder to the middle class, but the rules of gravity in this market were quietly rewritten. As globalization accelerated, real estate was entirely decoupled from local wages. A city's housing market was no longer dictated by what the people living and working in that city could afford. It became a safe deposit box for global capital. A billionaire on another continent could park $100 million in a portfolio of residential homes, driving up the median price, while the actual workers in that city were pushed further and further out into the sprawling, heavily congested margins. This artificial scarcity is not a bug in the system, it is the core feature. Zoning laws, originally pitched as a way to keep toxic industrial factories away from residential neighborhoods, were quietly weaponized by established property owners. By heavily restricting the construction of high-density housing, they choked the supply pipeline, artificially inflating the value of their own dirt. It is a cartel of the incumbent, defended by impenetrable local bureaucracies. But the darkest mechanics of this machine operate completely out of public view. What happens when the physical walls of a building are used to wash the sins of the global underworld? Let's step into the hyper-luxury penthouses of the world's most glamorous neon-lit metropolises. If you walk past these shimmering glass monoliths at night, you will notice something deeply unsettling. There are no lights on, there is no furniture, no one is home. These are ghost towers. Anonymous shell companies registered in highly secretive offshore tax havens buy up tens of millions of dollars in ultra-luxury property using pure cash. The identity of the true buyer is obscured behind layers of legal fictions, proxy directors, and blind trusts. A warlord, a corrupt politician, or a shadow syndicate can take dirty, untraceable money, funnel it through a phantom corporation, and buy a sky mansion. Suddenly, that dirty money is transformed into a clean, highly secure, appreciating legal asset. The property never needs to be rented out. It never needs to be lived in. Its pure function is to act as a concrete bank account that governments cannot easily seize. This creates a staggering distortion in the urban landscape. Cities are spending immense resources to build towering infrastructure that serves absolutely no human utility, while the actual population suffocates under an affordable housing crisis. And this hidden reality is not restricted to the ultra-rich. Over the last decade, highly secretive algorithmic trading firms have turned their crosshairs on the traditional family home. Using advanced data scraping, these automated behemoths monitor court filings, obituary notices, and neighborhood distress signals to identify desperate sellers. Within milliseconds, an algorithm calculates the exact maximum offer required to beat out a human buyer, deploys the capital, and snaps up the property before a local family even sees the listing. Entire neighborhoods are quietly swallowed by faceless corporate landlords who then rent the properties back to the very demographic they priced out of the market. The physical wear and tear on these homes is ignored, managed by apathetic call centers, while the profit margins are squeezed with absolute ruthless efficiency. The roof over your head has been fully optimized by a silicon brain that views you solely as a biological yield-generating unit. We saw the breaking point of this extreme financialization when the models collapsed in spectacular fashion during the global subprime mortgage crisis. Millions of people suddenly discovered that the abstraction layered over their physical home had snapped. The complex mathematical formulas predicting perpetual growth failed. People were left holding physical dirt that was suddenly worth less than half of the mathematical debt attached to it. Entire suburban developments turned into silent ghost towns, stripped of copper wiring and left to rot, while the architects of the financial disaster received massive bailouts funded by the very taxpayers who lost their homes. The system did not break. It simply reorganized, consolidated power, and bought up the distressed assets at violently discounted prices. As we project this machine into the coming decades, a new, catastrophic variable is rewriting the entire ledger. Climate volatility. For centuries, the most valuable dirt on the planet has been positioned at the absolute edge of the ocean. Coastal property was the ultimate status symbol, commanding astronomical premiums for the unobstructed view of the water. But the water is rising. The very asset that made these regions wealthy is now threatening to swallow them whole. Insurance conglomerates, utilizing predictive satellite modeling and terrifying actuarial mathematics, are quietly abandoning these coastal megacities. They refuse to underwrite the risk. Without insurance, you cannot get a mortgage. Without mortgages, the entire speculative bubble of coastal real estate collapses into absolute worthlessness. We are on the precipice of a massive, panicked migration of capital, fleeing the sinking coasts and rushing toward high-ground, climate-resilient zones. This is climate gentrification. The previously ignored elevated working-class neighborhoods are suddenly being targeted by aggressively funded developers, displacing the current residents to build fortified luxury enclaves. And in a bizarre, almost desperate reaction to the limitations of physical space, a faction of speculators has attempted to escape the physical world entirely, pouring billions into digital land within virtual reality landscapes. They are buying coordinates of non-existent dirt, desperately hoping to recreate the scarcity and explosive wealth generation of the physical real estate market. But this digital land grab fundamentally misunderstands what makes real estate powerful. You cannot physically occupy a string of code. You cannot grow food on a digital parcel. You cannot use it to establish physical dominance over a trade route or a water source. Ultimately, the brutal truth of real estate is that we are fighting over a closed system. The Earth is a finite sphere. They are not manufacturing any new continents. Every transaction, every glass tower, every digital deed is just a temporary reorganization of the same ancient dust that has been here since the planet cooled. We do not truly own the land. We simply hold a heavily guarded piece of paper that gives us permission to borrow it from the future, defending our claim until the dirt reclaims us. The system will continue to shift, adapt, and extract, driven by algorithms and shadowed by invisible empires. If you want to keep exploring the invisible forces shaping your reality, the hidden markets, and the systems of control operating right in front of your eyes, subscribe now and join our growing syndicate of curious minds.